Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not to Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about What If Season 2, Episode 4. An excellent episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So, I love just everything they did about this episode. This episode feels kind of like fast-paced in the sense of just how action it is, racing-wise, but also just like I'm curious how people are going to feel about it. It's very quippy, but it feels very poetic because what is Sakaar if not like a foundational part of Ragnarok? So it feels like you're bringing that Ragnarok flair because you got the seriousness and the jokiness, which obviously that's a criticism, obviously, for some people for Ragnarok. More so for Love and Thunder was a whole like, right, it was more jokey than serious, so on and so forth. Once again, you had those criticisms. That's okay. I can understand that being an issue for people, but either way, I really think this was an excellent episode and just kind of finding that line. And I love how they told the story the way they did. Obviously, it's like, right, the Guardians of the Multiverse. It's like, oh, but there's one Guardian we never got her story, which, once again, if you're unaware, this episode was actually supposed to be part of last season, but they ended up moving it to this season. But I like how they interwove it to be like, oh, we never got Gamora's story. This is one Guardian. We never got her story. Well, let's get it now. And her story being interwoven with Tony's. That was something, like, I knew her and Tony were going to be together because I think what we see at the end of this episode is where Gamora was when Uatu ended up picking her up for the Guardians of the Multiverse in episode 9, well, the season finale of last season. But I think it's so interesting, like, as I brought up Ragnarok before, this is, I mean, not just with Sakaar and just the tone, but even the storytelling device of, it's a Gamora story, but it's mainly like a Tony story. I mean, and what was Ragnarok if not a Thor story with a Hulk story mixed into it? It was mainly Thor's story with Hulk story, so we get that in this of how, and it's such an interesting timing frame to utilize this too, because Tony like took down the Sakaars, like he flew into space like he does in Avengers, except he never comes back to Earth. He ends up kind of very Ragnarok-esque, and that's once again the more direct parallel again of like him bumping around like what is essentially like the Bifrost, the equivalency of like the Bifrost, like, and landing on Sakaar. And they know exactly who he is because taking down the was it the Sakarans? What was that? When that I just said their name earlier, I'm already forgetting. I think so. But taking them down put Earth on the map because, yeah, you interfered with Thanos' plan. And so it was like, the Grandmaster was like, oh my god, we know exactly who you are, but never gets his name right the entire movie. I mean, the entire episode, Jesus. But I love, I feel like we got way more the Grandmaster in this than we even got in Ragnarok. So we got to see just how wild, even more wild and self-centered he is. Because we never really got into the elements of his ruling of the, I mean, to be fair, it's been a hot minute since I rewatched Ragnarok, but I don't think we really got too much into like the state of Sakaar. But it's like, oh, the people are starving. Yeah, they used to throw rotten fruit at people, but then it's like, yeah, we stopped doing that because the people are running low on food, and it feels like that would be very insensitive. So now they throw chinchillas and tin cans at people during the races. But yeah, Tony's suit is messed up and he can't leave because he's the honored guest and everything. And it's like, well, if you don't stay, you get melted by Topaz's stick. So Tony's a viewer of this situation as we see Korg in the mix. We also see Valkyrie in the mix. And Tony's there just kind of having to be, I love that he makes a comparison to NASCAR. He's like, no, it's different. As you can see, these are chariots. I mean, obviously it's a simple mistake anyone can make is his whole thing. Because it's like, oh yeah, you know, they must have something like this on your Earth? Yeah, sure, yep, you nailed it there, buddy. You got it right. So I love that. I don't know, it's nice to be able to, you get Jeff Goldblum like chopping up the scenery even more and just kind of letting him like cut loose. It's just really neat. Like I said, I think that's also why this episode feels so like snappy too, because like the dialogue feels like even more snappy because it's quippy. It's very quippy when you have like characters like Iron Man, a little bit of Korg's craziness mixed with the Grandmaster's craziness. It kind of leads to like the rambunctious situation we have. But I do love the racing. I thought that was like beautifully executed. Obviously, you like get the feel of like everything racing wise. Obviously, yeah, if you want to, you can throw in some Mario Party, but obviously like some Death Race, some Fast and the Furious. Twisted Metal, which is very poetic considering in the TV show, who's one of the main characters, if not the main character. I haven't seen the show yet. I've heard nothing but good things, but Twisted Metal, in the Twisted Metal show, it's Anthony Mackie's in it, so there's an MCU connection. Kind of get the other thing that kind of popped in my mind was like Jack 2 and Jack 3. Probably more Jack 2 than 3 because Jack 2 actually has a whole stadium. Can I remember correctly? Are there any races in Haven City in 3? Aren't all the races in the desert in 3? I know like you have the stadium races in 2, but I can't remember if there's any stadium races in 3. I don't think there are, but maybe there are. It's been a hot minute since I played Jack 3. But either way, it just kind of gave, especially kind of like that futuristic dystopian feel, which Jack 2 and 3 have. So I think that's what makes me draw that parallel even more. I'm surprised it took us like, I was almost, maybe it wasn't nearly halfway, but Gamora popped up in the episode later than I thought she would. Like I said, it is focuses a lot more on Tony, but it is this interesting dynamic. We get bits of pieces here and there, and then like it builds up over the course of the movie. Once again, kind of like the Hulk angle of it. But once again, we're also talking about like like how long is Thor Ragnarok? It's definitely got to be like 2 hours and some change. I don't know how long. But it's like you're talking about a full-length movie to like half an hour animated show. So, you know, a lot of stuff is going to be condensed anyway. But Tony wasn't just going to sit on the sidelines, and he ended up stepping in to help, especially when the creature ends up kind of running wild and is actually Gamora that ends up killing him. Then she starts trying to kill Tony. I'm like, why are you trying? It's like, oh, she works for her dad in this point in time. Well, because it wasn't until Guardians that she decided to turn against her dad. So she was loyal to him up until that point. I wonder, is she more like, I mean, who knows if Nebula is even a thing in this, like maybe he never adopted Nebula, or maybe she is out there just somewhere, but maybe Gamora is definitely more Nebula in this universe, but it also could be like at this time frame, but before Guardians she was very much like that, but she definitely gives more Nebula vibes in this moment. So that's why I'm like, I don't know if she got all of Thanos' attentions, like all of who he wanted Gamora to be ended up being put on to Nebula maybe, but now like maybe if there's no Nebula, it all falls on Gamora. So but yeah, this is where Tony ends up well, initially, like, the Grandmaster wants them to hook up because he's, like, feeling these sparks, and then Korg's there, and he's like, no, there's no one over here, just a pile of rocks with eyes. But it's, like, the reason why Gamora's going after Tony so hard is because it's like, right, you stopped my dad. It's like, whoa. That was Thanos? That was your father? And then this one, we got this really beautiful moment of just, like, Tony snapping because he's just like, you just sat back and watched it. You have fun watching as your daddy, like, tore us apart. He's like, I had a friend that died. I'm like, Coulson! Even though Coulson never gets referenced, it's like, don't forget our boy Coulson. All that he had to go through Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. You're going to put some respect on Phil Coulson's name. But yeah, it's just like, I had a friend die, and it's just like, this was all fun and games on your dad. And it's like, it is interesting for him to learn about Thanos years in advance. Because obviously he doesn't find out about Thanos until 2017-ish. Because that's when Infinity War happens. That's his first time he'd ever heard Thanos. Obviously, Thanos laid the groundwork for Loki and the invasion and everything during Avengers. But for him to find out this soon about Thanos and everything, that's really, really, I think that's a really interesting development, finding out this many years in advance about him. And he was almost about to, like, go full, like, evil against, like, he was very vindictive in that moment. I mean, it's just like, right, he was consumed by anger until he heard what the Grandmaster was saying of like, oh yeah, you might think he's a hero, but he's a bad guy. And in that moment, Tony stopped because he's like, right, doing that would make me just as bad as Thanos. He's like, right, so what I'm going to do, just to kind of prove even more to you of who I am, to show you what kind of person I am, I'm going to save this planet. Just because he wants to, but also just to spite her as well. So... because for him, it's like, this is what I do. I'm Iron Man. Because I love these, like, parallels As Jennifer Walters put it perfectly, there are so many daddy issues in the MCU, but also there's parallels. It never even crossed my mind to connect the whole like. Right, I never gave until Jennifer Walters pointed out like, yeah, it was probably there subconsciously, but I never really thought about it until She-Hulk of like, there's a lot of daddy issues in this continuity. I mean, in the MCU, but then also like the connection between Tony and Gamora having dad issues, and he's like, I know what it's like to live in your father's shadow, and he's just like, yeah, my dad wasn't, and Atticus Fitch and Gamora's like, who? It's like, right, To Kill a Mockingbird. Obviously that's like a reference that's going to go over her head, but also like all the different things he called, like, didn't he call like the Grinch at one point in time, or Oscar the Grouch, every green pop culture thing that you can. But what I also thought was interesting is the connection he made with Valkyrie, because he's like, I know what it's like. He's like, let me guess, like, the fact is of trying to drown yourself in alcohol to kind of escape the mistakes that you've made. And I was like, ooh, I never even drew the parallels between them of like, oh yeah, there's a lot of commonality, that there's characters, these characters would click because they all kind of share a lot of, Tony shares trauma and pain like with Valkyrie and with Gamora, you know. It's just like, oh, I thought that was so beautifully done. Like, once again, this episode, I'm sure plenty of other people put those parallels together. Would have never crossed my mind if it wasn't for this episode. I would have never drawn connections between Tony and Valkyrie or Gamora of like how similar he is in some capacities with what they're going through. But I love that being like this overall message of like the episode of like, you know, Tony, because Tony's had his growth over, you know, because this is Tony who's going through Iron Man 1, Iron Man 2, and Avengers. So granted, because obviously Iron Man 3 was the fallout of the trauma of what he went through, but to be fair, he went from one traumatic situation into another, so he hasn't really had time to decompress and process that because he's too busy trying to get back home to Pepper, because everyone thinks he's dead, so he wants to get back home, especially when he knows like there's a threat like Thanos out there. But that wasn't really the focus of his mind. It's just like, no, I need to get home. Because for Tony, this is his way to make up for the mistakes that he made, his selfishness and not really caring about other and being responsibility for hurting so many people. So even he has direct parallels to the Grandmaster. I'm sure for Tony, the Grandmaster is a representation of yes, I'm still egotistical, but I'm not the egotistical maniac that I once was. So for him, it's probably a situation of like the Grandmaster is kind of God, what's the term I'm looking for? A cautionary tale of like who he could be, like, or a representation of who he was and who he could have continued to be if he hadn't gone through what he went through in Iron Man and all of his experiences changing him into a better person. You know, because for him, he's like, even like the camp thing of leave a place better than you found it, and that's what he plans on doing. So working with Valkyrie and Gorg, he ends up making a new suit. We didn't really get to see much of it in this season finale, but we get to showcase it a lot more. And it looks, obviously, it's very like Hulkbuster inspired, even though I don't think Tony definitely hasn't made the Hulkbuster yet. So this could end up, in a sense, be kind of like the prototype, what would eventually become a version of the Hulkbuster later on. Just something interesting to think about. But yeah, I love that he challenges the Grandmaster to a race. The winner ends up taking the planet. And it's like, and even Topaz is like, we already have the planet. And the Grandmaster's like, ooh, I'm going to do this. And just like, Gamora's like, you're an idiot. He was like, no. He may be smart, but he's not master smart like me. It's interesting that despite everything, they were like, oh my God, we had no idea you were the daughter of Thanos. And it's just like, still end up forcing her to participate in the race and stuff. So, but this time, like, Tony's not in this alone. I like I said, I just love this whole race and the sequence. It was just beautifully animated. Like I said, extremely action packed. And the craziest part was like, that was sick when he flies out of the air and like his vehicle gets destroyed. I'm like, would that kind of discount him from the race? Because I thought maybe he just hop into Topaz's vehicle, but it's like, nope, he shifts his armor into a car. I was like, that is fucking sick, dude. And I love Topaz's line being like lame. It's like, it's the furthest thing from lame. That's so dope. You know, I meant to bring this up earlier too. I'm curious, had Sakar always gone through different like forms of entertainment over the years? At this time frame around 2012 is when they were doing the races, and in 2017-ish. To be fair, the Grandmaster did say time works a little differently on this planet. So for Tony, he feels like he's only been gone for like, he just landed in Sakar, but technically because of the time differences on the planets and stuff, he's technically probably been gone like days, if not weeks, probably. But either way, but it's just kind of interesting to know like what other like competitions do they have. Like obviously like what happened in between racing and just straight up fist tournament type of situation like we got in Ragnarok. But the entire time he's racing, he's trying to speak to Gamora's better nature of like, you don't have to be defined by your mistakes, which once again, he knows better than anyone that you are capable of change, because look at me, I was capable of change. You don't have to be who your dad wants you to be. You're only a murderer because he'd even thrown this at Gamora of like, do you know what it's like to watch your planet get destroyed? Which she did. We never got into it, but I'm sure her and Tony will eventually talk about it. But yeah, she was raised to be Thanos' daughter, but that was after he slaughtered half her planet, you know, and his decision to balance out the universe, which no one asked you to do it. You're the one that took it upon yourself, feeling like you were destined to be the one, because you're the only one that had the forethought, the vision to try and warn Titan, his planet, about what happened, and then they didn't listen. So for him, it's like, I don't want to make the same terrible mistake around the world. I will balance out the universe, and they'll thank me for it. It's like, yeah, right. I don't know if this was supposed to be a reference, but like they were talking about like what happens to all the winners, and Korg was like, yeah, they get put on like a farm, which obviously there's a parallel of farm being, that's what you're told as a kid when your pets die, your family. I never got that talk. Some people might make the argument that some people might be like, oh, that's a white family thing. I don't know. I don't know if that's something other minority families have ever dealt with. I've always seen it in the context of kind of a white family thing, but hey, maybe I'm mistaken. I just never had those conversations. It was just kind of like, I don't remember what my first experiences with death when it came to pets. That's a whole thing. But it's like, right, the whole send them off to a farm thing, but then it's like, yeah, you're in a box, and then you basically have rocks put on top of you. That was like Korg's way of putting it, not realizing it was about death, because they're not dead. But my point, we're also bringing it up, is like, well, we know Thanos's like reward was going off to a farm and living life as a farmer, and it's like, yeah, the universe will thank me, and my his own glorious purpose, and yada yada, so on and so forth. So it's just interesting. I think Gamora only said her name like once in the episode, didn't she, when she first showed up? Or did she introduce herself simply as the daughter of Thanos? I actually don't remember. I can't remember. She probably did say her name, but the focus of it just became, and if she said her name at first, I think that's an interesting, like, I wish I need to go back, because I'm actually curious like what she said, because if she introduced herself as the daughter of Thanos, I think that speaks volumes of, yeah, she's more Thanos' daughter than her own individual self. But even if she introduced herself, all anyone focused on was her being the daughter of Thanos, so it still applies of, okay, that's you just being recognized in that, and she says her name at the end. Just, I mean, the parallel of Tony calling himself Iron Man, but like even her being like, oh, aren't you? And it's like, okay, so that other name that the Grandmaster came up with is sticking. Okay, I'm glad to see that sticking around. But yeah, Tony coming clutch with the win, using his arc reactor to act as a boost, and nearly beating the Grandmaster. And because of that, it's like, yeah, and just like him flipping out, like the suit forming around him again. I was just like, dude, that's so beautifully done. That's so dope. But the Grandmaster is like, no, we tied, and because of that, I'm the one who gets the final say, and I say I'm the leader, which the people did not respond to. Topaz showed up to try and kill Tony, but Valkyrie got in the way, and the staff ends up touching the Grandmaster, and he starts melting. He's like, melting. Ooh, this is actually kind of nice. I'm like, just, once again, Jeff Goldblum just kind of like chopping up the scenery. I love it. But yeah, Valkyrie, and she kind of has her like Ragnarok walk, and then near when they were on Asgard and she was coming down fully suited up, it's like she kind of has that walk, and now she's the new leader, and she's got Korg by her side and everything. So kind of, which is going to be interesting to think about, because in this universe, well, a lot of stuff is going to be different, but that means like maybe, I mean, who knows? Asgard's fate might still be what it ends up being, Ragnarok, and Norse gods and stuff like that. But it could also just, I mean, like the event Ragnarok, not just the movie Ragnarok. But it might also tie into the fact that because things are going to play out differently, she never becomes king of Asgard or new Asgard. So, but she becomes the king of Sakaar. It's kind of nice to see she in different universes still manages to find her way to a throne. So, it's really neat to kind of know that. I mean, and I brought it up earlier about like the nightmares Tony had because of this. Obviously, that playing a role in his story in Iron Man 3. But it's kind of neat because Tony didn't really have adventures in the stars necessarily. I mean, obviously him and Nebula, but they were just like on their way trying to get back to Earth. He didn't really have any like planetary adventures outside of like fighting Thanos on. I mean, this wasn't like a fun ragtag adventure. It's still kind of a harrowing journey, but it's interesting. I feel like he got an opportunity to travel the stars a lot more than he did in the MCU like mainline continuity, which is kind of interesting. But before he could make his way back to Pepper, Gamora shows up and brings him to Thanos. And in that moment, and I love that the Watcher's like, right, rather than, even before, like, more so than a punch, like, what really changes someone, what can really change things is friendship, is love, and fighting knowing that someone's got your back. So Gamora's fighting her dad. Like, obviously, like, having that staff from Topaz isn't just going to melt him. It'll probably melt the suit. But this will also be a Thanos that doesn't have any of the Infinity Stones yet. That was the only reason why, like, because Tony held his own against Thanos, but that was a Thanos with Infinity Stones. I mean, granted, yes, Hulk still got his shit rocked, but it's him and Gamora together, so they definitely going to come out on top. But so that's definitely going to be interesting. I wonder, it's the Black... You'd assume the Black Order is established, but maybe they're somewhere out there in the universe because he probably didn't need to have them around at this point in time because, well, it's just Gamora coming to visit him with Tony, so... But Tony's probably going for the head this time around. Like I said, it's been a minute. I don't actually remember what circumstances Tony and Gamora were in before the Watcher grabbed them up. Because it was post Thanos. Like, I think they had just beaten Thanos, maybe. Well, to be fair, this fight doesn't end here. It can't, because she still has to create the Infinity Stone Crusher, not unless they go around doing that, but I'm assuming that's because they're trying to keep them out of Thanos' hands. So this fight might go on, and it's like, right, I gotta finish what I started, leave the galaxy better than the way I found it before I go back home to Pepper type of situation. So I think it ain't just gonna be some quick fight against Thanos. It's gonna be probably a full launch, like full blown war against Thanos out there. Which, I mean, yeah, think about it. I mean, we know Carol's out there, but I mean, once again, how much stuff is completely different, but she's out there to some extent, whether her story's still kind of the same mainline continuity-wise. The Guardians have not been established yet, still could be, so just stuff like that. Once again, I bring it up every episode, just the ripple effects of how different things would be. But like I said, this was just a very fun and just excellent episode. Like I said, I think it's probably my favorite one so far, so... this season. I don't know if it's going to be my favorite one overall. I'm curious. I'm trying to think in retrospect which one. I mean, because I like every episode. I know some people I like some more than others, and that's fine. But I like every episode for different reasons and just what they represent and just the tones and the genres that they're playing with. So, like, probably Doctor Strange is my favorite one of my favorites from last season because it's such a dark episode. But I like it because of that. It's a bummer of an episode. So there's just so much to love in each episode and what they represent in the grand scheme of things. So I don't know. I'm very excited to see where tomorrow's episode ends up taking us with all of this. Well, which will be today's episode by the time you're hearing this. I haven't made that correction every time I've said that before, but I'll do it now. But in the next episode, I'm excited to see what it will be. Like I said, I've avoided looking at the order, so I have no idea what these episodes are up next. And I don't want to know. Like I said, that's not an invite for you to tell me. I don't want to know. I'm saying that rhetorically, like, oh yeah, I have no idea what to expect other than what I saw in the trailer, but like I said, I don't know the order of these episodes, and once again, the fuller context, so I'm excited to find out where all this ends up taking us going forward next. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. good day, and goodbye.